Emma adjusted her vintage earrings one last time, her reflection framed by the antique mirror in the small Brooklyn boutique. The soft afternoon light spilled through the storefront windows, brushing her reddish-brown hair with a golden glow. For a fleeting moment, she felt beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made her think about the way Ryan's hands had lingered on her collarbone the night before. The memory sent a small shiver through her. Her phone buzzed against the glass counter, and when she glanced down to see Ryan's name flash across the screen, her pulse quickened. He had been on her mind all morning, his voice, his laugh, the way he whispered her name before leaving at dawn. She looked around the empty shop. Mrs. Chen, the boutique's owner, was still at lunch, and the street outside was quiet. Perfect timing. She slid the phone into her hands, her fingers moving with a boldness that always seemed to come more easily when she thought of him. The words flowed quickly, each one daring, meant to make him remember her all day long. I can't stop thinking about last night, the way you touched me. I want to feel your hands on me again. Tonight, I'm yours completely, no limits. Tell me what you want to do to me. Her thumb hovered over the send button for only a second before she pressed it, a rush of heat filling her chest. She set the phone down, smiling faintly at her own audacity. Ryan liked when she was direct, when she didn't pretend to be coy. At least she hoped he did. But a flicker of unease whispered in the back of her mind. She had typed his number so many times she could do it in her sleep. And yet, something felt off. She ignored it. 30 floors above Manhattan, in a glass-walled office that looked out across the city like a king surveying his kingdom, Thomas Whitmore was immersed in quarterly reports. His days were designed for efficiency, meeting, as slotted to the minute, calls filtered through his assistant, interruptions nearly impossible. He hated the unpredictable, which was why the unfamiliar chime of a personal message made him pause. He rarely received texts outside his curated contact list, and never ones from an unknown number. But there it was, bold, explicit, brazen. He read it once, then again. The words were not desperate or pleading, but raw, direct, alive in a way his world of calculated negotiations never allowed. Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the message as if it were a new acquisition waiting to be evaluated. Most men might ignore it, dismiss it with a polite wrong number. Thomas Whitmore wasn't most men. Everything to him was an exchange. Time for money, power for influence, pleasure for discretion. And this looked like an opening move. He typed his response with the same cool precision he applied to billion-dollar deals. Interesting proposition. $3,000 for 3 hours. My penthouse tomorrow at 7 p.m. Discreet, professional, no complications. Are you available? He hit send without hesitation, his face expressionless, though somewhere deep inside, he felt a ripple of anticipation. Back in the boutique, Emma was folding scarves when her phone buzzed. She glanced down casually and froze. Her stomach plummeted. It wasn't Ryan's name on the screen. It was an unknown number. Her fingers shook as she opened the message. The words hit her like ice water. $3,000. Penthouse, professional, no complications. Her throat went dry. Someone, this stranger, had taken her private message and twisted it into something transactional, cold, obscene in its precision. Heat rose up her neck, mortification flooding her. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was meant for someone else. Completely wrong number. Please just delete that and pretend it never happened. She pressed send frantically, praying the conversation would end there. The reply came almost instantly, calm and deliberate. I understand. However, you presented an offer, and I made a counteroffer. Are you declining? Emma stared at the screen, horrified. And yet, against her will, drawn in, there was something about the tone, controlled, unfazed, as if he hadn't been embarrassed at all, but intrigued. Who responded like this to a stranger's mistake? Who saw her message not as humiliation, but as negotiation? Her heart pounded. She should block him. She knew she should. But her fingers lingered over the screen. Whoever this man was, he wasn't ordinary. And as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't stop wondering why. Thomas Whitmore sat in his office with the city spread out beneath him like a glittering chessboard. For years, he had treated every move in his life like a calculation, every relationship like an investment, every outcome like a transaction. But that message from Emma had unsettled something inside him. It was reckless, raw, almost intoxicating in its honesty, and it refused to leave his thoughts. He replayed her words in his mind, not because of what they offered, but because of what they revealed. They were not written for him, yet he found himself claiming them as if fate had delivered them to his hands. Emma, meanwhile, tried to bury herself in work at the boutique, but the weight of that stranger's response pressed down on her. His words had been cold, sharp, like a man who had long forgotten how to blush or hesitate, and yet they lingered in her mind. Who was he, this man who could turn her most intimate mistake into a business transaction with a few clipped sentences? That night she lay awake, her phone glowing on the nightstand, her thumb hovering over the block button more than once. Each time she hesitated, and each time she hated herself for the curiosity burning in her chest. The next morning, while arranging new dresses in the window display, her phone buzzed. She told herself not to look, not to let him pull her further into his orbit. But she looked. A new message blinked across the screen. "You disappeared, Emma. Was my offer that offensive, or are you still considering?" Her heart stuttered at the sight of her name. He had typed it with a weight that made it feel like more than just a word. She almost dropped the phone. She had never given him her name. He had pulled it from somewhere, somehow, and that knowledge sent a ripple of fear through her. "How do you know my name?" she typed back quickly, her hands trembling. "You told me," he replied. "You signed one of your messages. Do you remember, Emma? People give away more of themselves than they realize." She scrolled back through the thread, and her stomach turned when she saw the tiny detail she had overlooked. She had signed one of her frantic apologies with her name, desperate to sound sincere. He had remembered, he had stored it away, and now he was using it with surgical precision. Emma told herself again to end it, to block the number, but his next message flashed before she could move. "Dinner, the Riverside, tonight at 8. If you don't appear, I'll assume you are not curious enough. But if you do, I promise the evening will not be wasted." Emma clutched the phone against her chest as if it were burning. Who was this man who issued invitations like commands? She should laugh, delete the message, pretend none of this ever happened. But her reflection in the boutique mirror betrayed her. She saw the way her pulse quickened, the way her eyes glowed with a dangerous mix of fear and intrigue. Far above her, in his glass tower, Thomas closed his laptop and straightened his cuffs. He was a man who never chased. Everything in his world came to him, yet for the first time in years, he found himself waiting, his attention fixed on a woman he had never met, all because of a sage that had never been meant for him. And in that waiting, a dangerous game had begun, one that neither of them would be able to control once the first move was made. Emma told herself 100 reasons not to go. She paced her apartment with her dress still hanging untouched on the closet door, her phone glowing like a silent dare on the nightstand. It would be foolish to walk into the orbit of a man who treated her mistake like a negotiation, foolish to meet someone who spoke as if the world bent around his decisions. And yet as the clock ticked closer to 8, she found herself slipping into the little black dress she kept for occasions that never seemed to arrive. Her pulse throbbed in her throat as she brushed on lipstick, each movement feeling less like preparation and more like surrender. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm, but to Emma everything felt sharpened. Every honk, every gust of wind seemed to whisper a warning. Still, she climbed into the waiting cab and gave the driver the address. The Riverside was no ordinary restaurant. It was the kind of place whispered about in glossy magazines, a cathedral of glass and light where senators and billionaires dined under chandeliers worth more than her yearly rent. Thomas Whitmore was already there when she entered, standing like he owned the marble floor beneath him. He wore a tuxedo that seemed poured onto his broad frame, his posture commanding but effortless. He looked at her the way a collector looks at a rare painting, as though she were an unexpected treasure he intended to study until he understood every secret brushstroke. "You came," he said, and it was not surprise in his voice but certainty, as though her presence had never been in question. Emma wanted to roll her eyes, to push back against the arrogance curling in his words, but she heard her own voice answering before she could stop it. "Against my better judgment." The waiter led them to a private corner table, the kind reserved for people with names powerful enough to command silence. Emma sat, Stiffly, her hands clenched under the table, while Thomas studied her like a strategist preparing his next move. He ordered for both of them without asking, and when she opened her mouth to protest, his eyes caught hers, calm and unyielding. "Trust me," he said. Dinner unfolded like a dance of blades. His questions cut close to bone. What she wanted in life, why she worked in a small boutique instead of chasing something bigger, what she feared the most. Each answer she gave seemed to satisfy some calculation running silently behind his gaze. When she finally snapped, "Why am I even here?" he leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Because I don't believe in accidents," Thomas said. "You appeared in my life with words most people never have the courage to say aloud. That wasn't chance. That was opportunity." Emma's laugh was brittle. "An opportunity you can buy." His reply was as sharp as it was shocking. "Yes, $10,000 a month, for 3 months. You accompany me to dinners, events, trips. You'll play a role, nothing more." The air left her lungs in a rush. She stared at him, stunned. It wasn't a joke. His expression was carved from stone, a proposal delivered as casually as if he were discussing stock options. "You're out of your mind," she said, rising abruptly. Chairs scraped, the clink of crystal rang across the dining room. Her face burned as she strode toward the door, desperate for air. But before she could step outside, her phone vibrated. She glanced down and froze, her world collapsing in on itself. The voice on the other end was trembling, urgent. Her mother's doctor. The words came like hammer blows. The cancer had spread. There was an experimental treatment, $45,000. Insurance would not cover it. Emma's hand shook as she lowered the phone. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass doors of the riverside, a woman trapped between pride and desperation, and when she turned, Thomas Whitmore was standing there, calm, patient, already knowing she would come back. In that instant, Emma realized this was no simple mistake anymore. She had stumbled into a game played on his terms, and her next choice might change everything she thought she knew about survival, about desire, and about herself. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Emma stared at the contract spread across the polished glass table in Thomas Whitmore's penthouse, the words blurring as her heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to refuse being turned into another item on his long list of possessions. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind, fragile with exhaustion, and the memory of the doctor's words made her throat tighten until she could barely breathe. $45,000 for a treatment that might give her mother more time. Without it, the countdown had already begun. Thomas sat across from her, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp with the intensity of a man used to sealing deals that altered empires. To him, this was no different. To Emma, it was everything. 6 months, she said finally, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. $15,000 a month. For the first 2 weeks you don't touch me, not even a handshake. If I decide I want out, I walk away, without penalty. Thomas leaned back, studying her with a flicker of surprise. For a moment Emma thought he might laugh at her defiance, but instead a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, small and dangerous. "Done," he said. She signed. The scratch of her pen against paper sounded louder than the city outside. And in that moment, Emma knew she had just bound herself to a world she did not understand. The penthouse was a monument of glass and steel, its walls reflecting Manhattan's endless skyline. Emma felt swallowed by it, out of place in her simple clothes, her presence like a smudge in an immaculate painting. Yeah, until Thomas seemed completely at ease, pouring 2 glasses of wine as if they were celebrating something ordinary. "You'll need to be fitted for gowns," he said. "The first event is this Saturday, a gala at the plaza." Emma's mouth went dry. "And what exactly am I supposed to be there for?" "You'll be there for me," Thomas replied simply. "To walk by my side, to make people wonder who you are, to listen, to smile, to exist in a way that unsettles those who underestimate you." Emma bristled. "So I'm decoration?" His gaze hardened, pinning her in place. "No. If I wanted decoration, I could find any model on Fifth Avenue. I chose you because you have something they don't. And what's that? She demanded. He leaned forward, his voice dropping low, steady. A mind that refuses to bend even when the world is pressing against it. You interest me, Emma. That's why you're here. Her chest tightened. She wanted to hate him for those words, for the calm way he dismantled her defenses. But a small part of her, a dangerous part, wondered if he was right. That night, back in her tiny apartment, Emma stared at the reflection of the borrowed diamonds Thomas had already sent over, glittering in the weak light of her bathroom mirror. They felt like chains disguised as jewels. She touched them and whispered to herself, "This is for Mom." But deep down she knew it wasn't only for her mother anymore. She had stepped onto a path that was twisting into something else entirely. And somewhere high above the city, Thomas Whitmore was already preparing the next move in a game that was no longer about contracts or money. It was about power, control, and the slow, inexorable pull of two lives colliding in ways neither of them could escape. The Plaza Hotel shimmered like a palace that night, its crystal chandeliers raining light over gowns worth more than Emma's yearly income and tuxedos tailored so precisely they seemed carved into their wearers. Emma stood in the back of the limousine with her hands clenched around a clutch Thomas's assistant had chosen for her, every nerve buzzing with dread. The navy silk gown hugged her body in a way that felt unnatural, too polished, too deliberate, and yet when she caught her reflection in the tinted glass, she hardly recognized herself. She looked like she belonged here, and that frightened her more than anything. When the car door opened, Thomas was already waiting at the entrance, every inch of him cut from the world of power. His tuxedo was flawless, his posture relaxed but commanding, as if even the sidewalk bent under his control. For a moment, Emma wondered how she had gotten here, how a wrong text had spun into this night. "You look beautiful," Thomas said, offering his arm with a formality that made her heart skip. "You always say that," Emma whispered back as she took it. "Because it's always true." Inside, the ballroom roared with voices polished by money and influence. Senators, CEOs, heirs to fortunes, all clustered in circles of quiet judgment. Emma felt their eyes skim over her like searchlights, testing her, measuring her, waiting to see if she would falter. "Relax," Thomas murmured in her ear, his hand resting lightly against the small of her back. "They're more afraid of you than you are of them." She nearly laughed at the absurdity of it, but the warmth of his hand steadied her pulse. Thomas guided her through the crowd with the ease of a man who had lived in this arena his whole life, pausing only to greet people with the right word, the right smile, never lingering too long, and always, his hand remained on her, subtle but constant, as if anchoring her to him. When Senator Harlan approached with his wife, Thomas introduced Emma without hesitation. "This is Emma Taylor, an expert in vintage fashion preservation. She has a remarkable perspective on sustainability and design." Emma's breath caught. She had no such title, but the lie rolled from Thomas's tongue as if it had always been the truth. All eyes turned to her. She forced a smile, lifted her chin, and found her voice. "It's not just about preserving fabrics," she said evenly, surprising even herself. "It's about preserving stories. Clothing carries memory, and when we throw it away without thought, we lose part of our history." The senator's wife brightened, nodding enthusiastically. "How fascinating. I'd love to hear more." The conversation grew, branching into debates about art, preservation, and social inequality. Emma spoke carefully at first, then with growing confidence as she realized they were listening, really listening, to her. For the first time, she wasn't invisible, wasn't ordinary. She was a woman who could hold her ground in a room full of power. When the senator and his wife moved on, Thomas bent closer, his lips brushing her ear. "You were extraordinary." Emma turned to him, flustered, her cheeks warm. "You lied to them about me." "I gave them a version of you they were too blind to see," he replied. "And you proved me right." The rest of the evening unfolded in the same strange rhythm. Conversations that should have crushed her instead left her exhilarated. By the time dessert was served, Emma realized she wasn't simply surviving Thomas's world, she was adapting to it, reshaping herself within it. But when a wealthy philanthropist's wife leaned across the table and whispered, "You're nothing like the companions Thomas usually brings. You have substance." Emma nearly choked on her wine. Companions. The word lodged in her chest, like a shard of glass. She forced a polite smile, but inside the unease grew. She had thought she was unique in this twisted arrangement, that she was an exception. Yet the woman's words hinted at others before her, women who had played this same role, who had been fitted in silk and diamonds to stand at Thomas Whitmore's side. As Thomas rose to speak with a cluster of business leaders, Emma's eyes followed him across the glittering ballroom. For the first time since their contract began, doubt wrapped its icy fingers around her. Maybe she wasn't exceptional to him at all. Maybe she was just the newest piece on his chessboard. And in that crowded, dazzling room, Emma felt the first crack open in the fragile wall of trust she had been building. Emma's mind was still echoing with that single word, companions, long after the last glass of champagne had been cleared away. The drive back from the plaza was silent, the kind of silence that thickens the air and makes it impossible to breathe. Thomas sat beside her, his expression calm, as if the night had been flawless. But Emma's gaze stayed fixed on the glittering city rushing past the window, her chest tightening with every block they passed. When the car pulled up outside her building, she finally spoke. "How many women, Thomas?" His eyes flicked toward her, the faintest crease forming between his brows. "Why do you ask that?" "Because someone at the gala didn't see me. She saw a pattern. She called me different from the others." "What others, Thomas? How many before me?" For a long moment, he said nothing, and the quiet pressed against her ears like a storm about to break. Then he exhaled slowly. 3, maybe 4. None of them lasted. Emma turned to him, her throat tight. "So this is what you do? You dress them up, give them a part to play, then when you're bored you move on to the next." His jaw tightened. "It wasn't like this. With them, it was never like this." Emma laughed bitterly. "Then what is this exactly? A contract, a test drive before you discard me like the rest?" Thomas reached for her hand, but she pulled it back as if his touch burned. His voice dropped lower, rougher. "You are the complication, Emma. The one I didn't plan for. The one who refuses to fit neatly into my rules. That's why you terrify me." Her heart stumbled at the rawness in his tone, but fear quickly swallowed it. "I don't want to be another chapter in your collection, Thomas. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I was never anything more than a project you took on because you were bored." He looked at her with something uncharacteristic, almost vulnerable, but she couldn't bear it. She opened the car door and stepped out without another word, leaving him behind. The days that followed were filled with a tension that gnawed at her resolve. She threw herself into the boutique, folding dresses and arranging displays with mechanical focus. But every time her phone buzzed, she felt the tug of his presence. Messages piled up unanswered, calls rang out into silence, yet still he persisted, never angry, always patient. On the third evening, when she returned home from work, she found a simple box waiting at her door. Inside was not jewelry or silk, but a small notebook, its first page filled with his handwriting. "You said you didn't want to be a decoration. Prove it. Fill these pages with the things you won't say aloud, the truths you hide even from yourself. I want that, Emma, not the one you think I want." She clutched the notebook to her chest, torn between fury and the dangerous pull of curiosity. Why did he want her thoughts, her secrets, when he could have any woman in the city dressed to perfection at his side? She wanted to throw it away, to erase the temptation, but that night, under the quiet hum of her lamp, her pen touched the first page. By the time dawn seeped through the blinds, half the notebook was filled with her words, confessions she hadn't meant to share, truths she hadn't even known she was carrying. And with every line she wrote, Emma realized something terrifying. Thomas Whitmore was no longer just controlling her circumstances. He was reaching inside her, dismantling walls she had built long before he appeared. And if she didn't stop him soon, she feared there would be nothing left of her that didn't belong to him. Emma stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, her fingers curling tightly around her champagne glass as though it could anchor her. The Hope Foundation ball was even more dazzling than the Plaza Gala, every corner dripping with wealth and power. But Emma barely noticed the chandeliers or the gowns shimmering under the golden light. Her eyes were fixed on the woman moving through the crowd like a queen returning to her throne. Isabel Hamilton, tall, graceful, dressed in a crimson silk gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her platinum hair was pulled into a perfect chignon, her every step deliberate, and her gaze, sharp as a blade, was locked on Thomas. Emma felt her stomach twist as Isabel reached them, her smile polished, but predatory. "Thomas," she purred, her European accent rolling off her tongue like honey hiding poison. "What a delightful surprise." Thomas's hand on Emma's waist tightened, just slightly, but it was enough for her to feel the tension vibrating beneath his calm exterior. "Isabel," he said coolly, "this is Emma Taylor." Isabel's smile widened as her eyes swept over Emma with surgical precision. "Ah, so this is your new acquisition." The word landed like a slap. She extended a manicured hand. "Pleasure to meet you, dear." Emma forced a smile and shook her hand, though Isabel's rings dug into her fingers like claws. "The pleasure is mine." Holmes intervened quickly, guiding Emma away with a firm hand, but the damage was done. Isabel's voice followed them like a shadow. "Thomas has always had a taste for projects." The rest of the night blurred, Emma moving through conversations like a puppet while her thoughts spiraled. Isabel's words echoed in her ears. Projects, acquisitions. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the rhythm of the evening. But every time she caught Thomas's eyes across the table, she saw something unreadable there, something that made her wonder if Isabel had spoken a truth Emma was too blind to see. Later, while Thomas was pulled into a circle of powerful men discussing corporate mergers, Isabel found her again. She leaned close, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "How much is he paying you?" Emma's breath caught. "Excuse me." "Oh, come now," Isabel said smoothly. "I've seen this play before. Young, beautiful, desperate women. He pays their bills, dresses them up, parades them around until he grows bored. Then he replaces them. Ashley, Melissa, Catherine. Each of them thought they were special too." Emma's chest tightened painfully. "You're lying." Isabel laughed softly, the sound cruel. "Am I?" "He and I were engaged once. Did he ever mention that?" "You see, I was one of his arrangements too, though I was clever enough to make it look respectable, until I discovered he was paying others while promising me the world. That's who Thomas Whitmore is, a collector. And you, my dear, are just his latest piece." Emma's vision blurred. She stumbled away, her heels clicking too loudly against the marble floor. She pushed past glittering gowns and murmured conversations until she found herself in the cold emptiness of the hotel bathroom. She gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The diamonds at her neck suddenly looked like shackles. Her gown las. Kia costume. The door closed behind her, muffling the music of the ballroom. In the silence, Isabel's words sank deeper, wrapping around Emma's chest like a vice. For weeks she had let herself believe Thomas saw her as different, that she was more than a contract, more than a mistake turned into an arrangement. But what if she was wrong? What if Isabel was right? What if she was just another name on his list of forgotten women? When she finally stepped out of the bathroom, 15 minutes later, the ballroom had shifted. Thomas was nowhere to be seen. A waiter, when asked, said he had left not long ago. Emma's phone buzzed in her clutch. She typed quickly, her fingers shaking, not feeling well, going home. She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't want to see his words. Not tonight. Not when her heart already felt like it was breaking under the weight of someone else's truths. As the taxi pulled away from the glittering hotel, Emma looked back at the glowing windows where the city's most powerful continued their games. And for the first time since this all began, she wondered if she had just been playing a role in Thomas Whitmore's performance, one she was never meant to survive with her heart intact. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion, a far cry from the glittering ballroom Emma had fled only hours before. She sat slumped in a plastic chair outside her mother's room, her eyes swollen from crying. Her gown was gone, replaced by jeans and a simple blouse hastily pulled from her closet, as though she could erase the memory of that night by stripping away its costume. But Isabel's words clung to her like a stain she could not wash out. Emma's phone buzzed again, Thomas's name glowing insistently across the screen. She let it ring until it died. Then it rang again, and again. She shoved it deep into her bag, refusing to let his voice worm its way into her already fractured heart. But Thomas Whitmore was not a man who accepted silence. 2 days later, long past midnight, the doors of the oncology wing burst open. He appeared in a storm of urgency, his usual perfect composure cracked. His tie hung loose, his hair disheveled, his eyes rimmed with sleepless fury. Nurses turned their heads as the billionaire strode down the corridor, but Emma barely lifted her gaze from the floor. "Emma," he said, his voice rougher than she had ever heard. She looked up, her body trembling, not from surprise, but from the weight of all the questions tearing through her. "How did you even find me?" "I have resources and patience," he answered without hesitation. He dropped to his knees in front of her chair, ignoring the curious stares of passing staff. "Emma, what Isabel said to you. Tell me what you heard." Her chest rose and fell unevenly, her voice hoarse from days of silence. "She said I wasn't the first, that there were others before me, that you pay women like me, that I am just another project." Thomas closed his eyes, as though the admission burned him. When he opened them again, there was no armor in his expression, only raw truth. "Yes, there were others, and yes, I gave them money, but it was never like this. It was never you." Emma's laugh cracked like glass. "That isn't an answer, Thomas. That's a riddle. Am I supposed to believe that I am special while you admit I'm just part of a pattern?" He reached for her hands. This time she didn't pull away, though her whole body shook. "At first you were a transaction. That is true. But then you became something I couldn't control. You laugh when you should be terrified. You challenge me when no one else dares. You look at me as if you see past the empire to the man standing alone inside it. You are the complication I never expected, and I love you for it." The words fell between them like thunder, echoing down the sterile hallway. Emma's breath caught, her heart breaking open under the weight of them. "No," she whispered, tears streaming. "You can't say that. Not here. Not now." "Why not?" His voice shook for the first time. "It's the only truth I have left." "Because my mother is dying," Emma said, the word clawing out of her throat like a scream she had been holding back. "Because I don't have the strength to wonder if your love is real when I am already losing the only person who has ever loved me without condition." Silence fell heavy between them. Thomas's grip tightened on her hands, his forehead lowering to rest against hers, his breath unsteady. "Then let me carry this with you. Let me fight for you, Emma. Not as a contract, not as a bargain, as a man who loves you more than his own life." Her tears blurred everything until the world was nothing but his face close to hers, his voice breaking in a way that made her believe, against all reason, that maybe he was telling the truth. But when a nurse appeared, calling her name to say her mother was awake, Emma pulled back, her hands slipping from his. "I need time," she whispered. He nodded once, a silent vow in his eyes. "Take it. Take all the time you need. I will be here, no matter how long it takes." And as Emma disappeared into her mother's room, Thomas remained kneeling on the cold linoleum floor, his empire forgotten, his heart entirely in her hands, knowing for the first time in his life that power meant nothing compared to the terror of losing her. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of hospital beeps, whispered conversations, and the steady presence of flowers on the windowsill. Every morning, a new bouquet arrived, never extravagant, never loud, just daisies, Sarah Taylor's favorite. Emma knew without asking who had sent them. She told herself she wouldn't soften, that his words in the corridor were just another carefully chosen performance. But when her mother asked with a tired smile who kept filling the room with sunlight, Emma could only shake her head. On the fourth day, Sarah caught her off guard. "So when are you going to bring him in here instead of letting him haunt the hallways with flowers?" Emma looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. "Mom, you need rest, not—" "Emma Catherine Taylor," her mother said firmly, her voice weak, but her eyes bright. "I may be sick, but I'm not blind. That man has been sending me hope every morning, and I want to see the face behind it." Emma hesitated, torn between pride and fear, but eventually she nodded. 2 hours later, Thomas Whitmore walked into the room. For once he seemed uncertain, as if the sterile hospital air had stripped away his usual armor. He held not flowers this time, but a small pot of lavender, its scent gentle and grounding. "Mrs. Taylor," he said quietly, setting it by the bed. "It's an honor." Sarah studied him for a long moment before smiling faintly. "So you're the one who made my daughter look like she's been struck by lightning?" Thomas's mouth curved, a rare and fragile smile. "Guilty." Emma watched as her mother invited him to sit, as though she had known him all her life. The conversation that followed unsettled Emma in ways she hadn't expected. Thomas didn't posture, he didn't perform. He answered Sarah's questions honestly, his voice softening whenever he spoke about Emma. When Sarah finally leaned closer and asked, "Do you love my daughter?" the silence in the room seemed to shiver. Thomas didn't blink. "More than I love myself." Sarah's frail hand gripped his with surprising strength. "Then promise me something. Promise me you'll never let fear win over love. Promise me you won't let her run just because." "Is she scared?" "I promise," Thomas said, and Emma felt her heart twist. That night, as she walked him to the parking lot, the silence between them was different. He stopped beneath the harsh glow of the lights and turned to her. His eyes searched hers, unflinching. "Emma," he said, "marry me." Her breath caught. "Thomas, you can't." "Not as part of a contract. Not as a bargain, not because of money or desperation. Because I love you. Because I cannot imagine another day without you by my side." Her chest ached with the force of it, with the fear and the longing colliding inside her. "What if we're too different? What if it falls apart? What if I'm not enough for your world?" He stepped closer, his voice low, almost breaking. "Then let it fall apart. Let it be messy. Let it be real. I don't want perfection. I want you. Only you." Emma's eyes burned with tears, and though she couldn't say the word yet, she felt it swelling in her chest like a tide that would not be held back. She touched his hand, briefly, and whispered, "I need time." Thomas nodded, his gaze steady, his expression both fierce and tender. "Then take it. But know this, Emma Taylor. No matter how much time you need, my answer will never change." As she watched him walk away into the night, Emma realized her world was no longer divided between fear and survival. It was split open by something far more dangerous. Hope. The church smelled faintly of lilies and candle wax, its wooden pews worn smooth by years of whispered prayers. Emma stood at the doorway in her mother's altered wedding dress, her hands trembling as she clutched the bouquet. The lace was old, the fabric simple, nothing like the gowns she had worn at Thomas's side during galas, but somehow this felt more like her than anything else. Outside, rain pattered softly on the roof, a quiet reminder that the world beyond was still unpredictable. Inside, Thomas waited at the altar, his usually unshakable composure cracked by the unmistakable shimmer of nerves in his eyes. When she walked down the aisle, she saw something she had never expected from him. He wasn't looking at her like she was an acquisition or a puzzle to solve. He looked at her like she was home. By the time she reached him, her chest ached with a truth too powerful to deny. When the vows came, she barely heard the words, only the steadiness of his hand as he slid the ring onto her finger, and the raw promise in his voice when he said he would never let fear win over love. 3 weeks later, the boutique Emma had dreamed of owning finally opened its doors. She named it Vintage Ray, and though Thomas had offered to buy her a flagship store in Manhattan, she had insisted on doing it on her own terms, taking a loan with proper interest and repayment. She needed to prove to herself that she could build something of her own, not just stand in the shadow of his empire. Thomas respected that, though every day he checked the progress with the kind of quiet pride that told Emma he saw her victories as his own. But life did not slow down. One evening, while arranging dresses on mannequins, Emma felt the floor sway beneath her. The nausea came fast, sending her rushing to the back room. At first, she blamed nerves, stress, exhaustion. Yet when it happened again the next morning, she went to the pharmacy and bought 3 tests. The results stared back at her in pink lines that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. She was pregnant. Her first instinct was fear. Their marriage was still so new, balanced on fragile trust and tentative beginnings. What if this broke it? What if Thomas wasn't ready? What if she wasn't ready? She carried the secret in silence for 2 days, her heart a battlefield of doubt. Finally, she returned home to find him in the kitchen, flour dusting his hands as he struggled with a recipe her mother had taught him. His face lit up at the sight of her, and in that warmth she found the courage. "Thomas," she whispered, placing the test on the counter between them. "I'm pregnant?" For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. Then his expression cracked open, and Emma saw something she had never seen before. Pure joy. He swept her into his arms, spinning her as though he couldn't contain the happiness bursting inside him. "We're having a baby," he whispered against her hair. "Emma, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted." Tears blurred her vision. "Are you sure you want this, Thomas?" He framed her face in his hands, his eyes burning with a rare tenderness. "I want everything with you. The chaos, the fear, the love, the family, all of it, especially this." Months passed, and the house in Alpharetta filled with quiet laughter and the scent of her mother's cooking. Sarah, against all odds, had survived her treatment and now visited every month, her health stronger than doctors had predicted. She took over the kitchen with her famous lasagna, scolding Thomas for putting too much cheese while secretly smiling at the way he called her mom. On warm nights, Emma and Thomas sat on the terrace, her belly round with new life, the stars stretched above them like 1,000 promises. He would rest his hand on her stomach and whisper predictions of their daughter's stubbornness, swearing she would inherit Emma's fire. Emma would laugh, but her heart would swell with hope she had once believed impossible. One night, as the cicadas hummed in the garden, she turned to him and whispered, "Who would have thought it all started with a text sent to the wrong number?" Thomas's eyes softened. "It wasn't wrong," he said. "It was destiny." And in that moment, with her mother safe, her husband's arms around her, and their unborn child pressing against her ribs as if impatient to join their world, Emma finally understood. Life's greatest miracles are often born from mistakes, and love, when chosen despite fear, becomes the most powerful destiny of all.